And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World, where every word matters. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guest on this next interview. Now, the war in Ukraine continues to see intense battles and significant human costs. But one glimmer of hope in this dire situation comes through prisoner exchanges, with the latest swap involving 206 soldiers. This exchange, brokered by the UAE, saw Ukraine welcome home soldiers captured during key battles, including in Kyiv and Donetsk. Joining us today on TVP World to discuss the implications of this exchange is Bartłomiej Kot, a program director at the Warsaw Security Forum. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning.
So can you help us understand how significant is the latest prisoner exchange in the context of this ongoing war?
It was certainly the biggest in the volume. That's one thing. Secondly, the fact that the exchanges they happen, this is pretty much the course of this war. It's not the first one. It will probably not be the last one. What they bring, and this is actually something which is interesting to me, is the implications they have mostly on the Russian side rather than on the Ukrainian side. If I were to unpack it, like why Putin might be interested in those exchanges taking place, because I wouldn't say that this is a kind of a de-escalation effort. So, but one day there is the prisoners exchange, and then right after Medvedev talks about the nuclear threat to Kyiv or to Europe. So I wouldn't treat that as a de-escalation.
It's probably not a sign of goodwill.
And not at all. But the truth is that Putin uses sometimes both the sticks and carrots when it comes to the communication he does to his own population, to Russians. And we know that's not only the course of this war, but it also was the case in the 1990s, how much actually the movement of women, both mothers and wives of those who are in prison, those who were captured by Ukrainians, and then back then in the 90s by Chechens, how much this has or can have the implications on the internal matters in Russia. They can actually be quite a powerful movement that can have an impact on the courses of the political issues happening in Russia. And in my opinion, Putin wants to de-escalate this thing internally in Russia when it comes to any potential movement, grassroots movement among Russians, especially on the side of female population.
Can you help us unpack a little bit of it? You mentioned that this might be like a stick and carrot method when it comes to internal politics messaging. What's the stick? What's the carrot? And what do you mean by this being able to maybe quell some of the issues internally?
Well, we will have to take a step back and actually understand how the war is pictured in Russia itself. Who is actually the subject of mobilization, and how much this is actually not equal in terms of the regions internally in the Russian Federation. Of course, the most burdened one are the ones that come from the minorities, from the ethnic minorities, such as Bashkiria or Dagestan. Those are the places where a lot of the ethnic minorities are actually the subject of mobilization. It started once the mobilization wave was broadened. It also started impacting the middle class of Russians, but this is not basically the most of the people who go to the front line. It is still rather the case of the poorest ones, or the ones who are actually incentivized by the fact that they will be getting a lot of money because of not only the fact that they participate in the war, but also once they are wounded or they are dead. Their families, they also earn quite a lot of money in terms of the potential Russian earnings, everyday earnings. So there is a strong economic interest in among those people to be a part of this warfare, of the Russian warfare machine. At the same time, of course, Putin is using a lot of the propaganda tools to both either stop people from going into streets and protesting against the war, and even the fact that they come outside with blank placards without any slogans. It is enough for the Russian police forces to to imprison these people. And in fact, the level of incarceration of the Russian population currently is very high. I mean, there is a strong message, a strong engagement of the police forces against anyone who could be actually protesting in the streets. Having said that, the only possible, in my opinion, political movement, and not necessarily only political anti-Kremlin movement, but actually the one that could spark the interest of the people, the grassroots movement, could be similar to the ones that happened in the 1990s during the Chechen War. Back then, mostly the female population was dragged to the streets with the slogans of actually allowing their children, their sons, their fathers, their husbands to be taken out of the prisoners of war camps in Chechnya. So that was actually something that brought those people to the streets. And in fact, the issue is here that it is harder for the Kremlin to build the narrative, the propaganda narrative, that would be actually anti-female or anti-mother or anti-wife in a sense, because these subjects of the Russian population are also part of the, let's say, a propaganda messaging that the Kremlin is using, that the mothers of Russia should be actually supportive of the war, should be supportive of protection of the motherland. There is some kind of the similarity in the narrative that the Russian state is producing, that both the course, the activity of the mother in a family is similar to the one of the Russian Federation as a motherland, as such, to all the Russian people. Right. So it's hard to shape the narrative, the propaganda narrative, once you actually start imprisoning mothers and wives in the streets.
Right, and also in a maybe lesser extent, the external messages is all about these kind of family values and traditional values. So it'll make it very hard for their messaging to go through if they start imprisoning these people. I want to turn our attention to also the role that the UAE play as a mediator in this exchanges. Why has it been so effective? And do you think that this might somewhat change the international narrative when it comes to these more neutral partners, or at least countries that are trying to play both sides?
Well, UAE was effective because it's not considered by both sides, but by either of the sides as being a side of the war, or some party that is more supportive of one or the other. And actually, the Arab countries are quite a good players in that terms when it comes to this war, because it wasn't only the exchange of prisoners, there was a lot of the negotiations happening around also the grain deal, etc., with the use of the nations coming from this part of the world. The third nations, the not involved nations into this conflict, are certainly, in my opinion, the key to the de-escalation of the war itself. And it's understood, in my opinion, also by the United States of America. Especially recently, we know that the Biden administration has actually handed in the strategy of the war in Ukraine recently to the Congress. It is the first document of its kind. It was actually the result of the fact that it was a part of the negotiations related to the supplemental that went for the Congress with the huge support to Ukraine. So the administration was obliged to produce this document. And as much as it is actually, we don't know what is inside, it's secret. We know that the part of this strategy is probably related to how actually engage with the third parties, how to firstly create narratives that also are interesting for countries such as India, such as Arab nations, etc., and how to actually protect them from becoming a part of the narratives that Russia is spreading, because we have to take that into account, that some also post-colonial narratives that were produced by Russia and that used to be produced back then by USSR are quite common in those countries. And there is also a place for countries such as Poland that actually could speak to those nations without this burden of the post-colonial power.
Right, and going back to the prisoners that have been exchanged, well, a lot of these people are from very high-profile battles like Mariupol and Azovstal, and I can just very easily imagine that being a pretty good morale boost for the Ukrainian side. Won't that hurt the Russian narrative in any way, shape, or form? How would Vladimir Putin allow that to take place if that somehow hurts his credibility?
I mean, it's tit for tat. I mean, he's of course getting something in exchange, especially given the fact that a lot of the prisoners of war that were released from the Russian armed forces were actually captured during the recent incursion in Kursk Oblast. So for him, for his own propaganda use, this is actually something which is profitable. Of course, there is a morale boost on the Ukrainian side, but given how much actually the Ukraine side will be under the pressure in the upcoming months because of the winter time, because of how much the energy grid on the infrastructure, etc., on the Ukrainian side is destroyed right now. I would say Putin actually profits from the fact that that the prisoners of war that were taken during the Kursk incursion are actually back in Russia. This is actually profitable for him. So I understand that he, simply speaking, weighed both things, and it is a plus for him in a sense.
All right, and of course, in the meantime, it is still a welcoming sight to see these soldiers coming back home. And last but not least, do you see these exchanges influencing any kind of diplomatic efforts between Ukraine and Russia moving forward, or do you think, like you mentioned, it's probably just for kind of Russian domestic consumption, and it doesn't really signal any sort of goodwill or opening up a dialogue?
Of course, the talks about any possible peace talks are around, and they were also part of the Russian propaganda as such. I mean, of course, Putin is also using the potential for peace talks as a part of his own propaganda. At the same time, creating the narrative, which is actually very common in Russian strategy, which is escalate to de-escalate. So we'll use the nuclear warheads against Ukraine, against Europe, in order actually to, it is a bit of a chicken play, let me put it that way, so that the other part, the NATO countries or Ukraine, steps back from, for example, invading the Russian territories, or allowing Ukraine to use the ballistic missiles on the Russian territory. But in the end, I wouldn't consider that as a sign of a goodwill. They are still very much committed to winning in Ukraine, and actually the recent gains they are having, especially in the eastern parts of Ukraine, are a part of their. They're considering that as actually some small successes in the front line.
All right, thank you so much for helping us unpack this situation. Really appreciate it. Thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers. And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.